Hello everyone. This video introduces us to the unit for week 2 of Economics of Gender. In this class, we are of course trying to use economics of gender as a way both to understand the economic issues and as a way to get a feeling for how we can use numbers in making sense of the world. So following along on our previous discussion about invisibility and hypervisibility in the numbers and varieties of numbers, I am now going to introduce you to the single most commonly used measure of economic well-being and economic growth that has historically been used to measure whether an economy is doing well. The GDP, or the gross domestic product. So in this unit, we are first going to learn exactly what the GDP, or the gross domestic product, is. It is a measure of the total value of all newly produced goods and services that are generated inside the borders of an economy that flow through the market in 1 year. Every single element of this definition is going to be useful. In order for us to make sure that the GDP is a good measure of what is happening in the economy, we are going to have to pay some attention to what's included in the GDP, what's not included in the GDP. We're also going to have to pay some attention to what exactly it is the GDP does measure and what it is that the GDP does not capture. We'll have to learn about how to adjust the GDP when it is a nominal GDP. Remember that in this case, it's a scale where I can't really do more detailed comparisons, and how to convert it into what I'm going to call the real GDP, which is then a measure that I can use to do things like year-to-year comparisons, to be able to say that what I produced this year is more or less than what I produced last year. So the first unit will be about generating the GDP, and you have a set of videos that go with that. Following that, I'm going to ask you to watch a video by Marilyn Waring, which discusses very particularly the invisibility, first, of women's unpaid labor in the home, and second, of environmental costs and nature in the GDP. So there are these two things. The GDP fails to capture many things, but for our class, we're going to focus on these two major missing elements in the GDP. And what we're going to find out is that invisibility of women's labor in the home and invisibility of the destruction of the natural environment and natural resources in the numbers both mean that, therefore, when you are invisible in the numbers and you're using the numbers to decide what kind of economic policy the government should follow when it comes to fiscal policy, regulation, taxes, spending, if you're invisible in the numbers, then you are invisible in the policy. So we're going to figure out one of the first major consequences of invisibility in the numbers, following our prior discussion of noticing numbers. If we notice the GDP consistently and constantly as a way to measure how the economy is doing, and these elements are invisible in the numbers, then that means that these elements are not noticed when policy is being crafted, or they are treated as secondary issues in policy discussions, and therefore you can end up with decades and decades of policy which essentially failed to pay attention to these issues. So that is our week